it seemed I had a lot of other things going on at the same time. I love technology. It just seems to make everything go crazy. But, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Forgotten OneCast. I am your host, CJP. And with me tonight, I have got a person that I've streamed with on several different channels, and just an all-around cool dude. And I love the Derek Smalls look. You can't go wrong with that. So tonight we're going to bang our heads and let mental health drive us mad. Like, welcome to the show, 32 Flavors of Nickweiser. Mr. Nickweiser, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good. I just had pizza with the family. It was really delicious and very fulfilling. Pun completely intended. I'm happy to be here. What's up, chat? Thank you for being here early and right away, too. And CJP, it's awesome to be with you. Yeah, we have streamed a few times, but now it's time you and I get to actually have a proper dialogue. So that's what I liked about this. Like, when you're on the big panel, it's all fun, but there's always like, I like to see what's going on in the other heads of all the air guys. So now we get to do this individually. So it's going to be a nice hour of talking heavy metal, per se.
That's what we're going to do, because I'm not as steeped in the culture as I believe that you are, but I do like metal. Of course, I'm a neophyte when we really want to get down to it. There are certain bands that I like, certain ones that I'm like, meh. More periods that I'm more affiliated, have affinity to than others. So
I'm that guy, and with every band to some point. So I think it'll work out just fine. If not, maybe I'll teach you about something you haven't heard, and you might want to be saying, "Hey, that sounds cool. I should check that out."
I'm always opening to listen to new music. That's awesome. The one thing YouTube has gotten right on its algorithm on occasion is it's me some stuff I've never heard before, and I'm like, ooh, I like that. I really do.
I love it.
Gnome.
Say that again.
A band called Gnome out of Germany.
Okay.
Just I wouldn't really classify them as metal per se, but they're just a good hard rock power trio.
Okay.
And they were known.
Okay.
So
that's good. I think you're onto something with that, even if it's not metal. I think there's a good valid point to be made about that, because there's a lot of bands, especially on the metal side, whether it's the traditional wave or the thrash side or the death or black metal sides, where all those subgenres in between, there are bands who, let's just say, maybe they had small but very little fan bases. Maybe they had like a bad record deal or bad management in the 80s. Mm-hmm. A lot of them revived their careers a few years after YouTube exploded, because all these things would get unearthed on YouTube, and people are like, hey, who is this band that had one album out and they broke up immediately after? And then before you know it, they're back together because they gained a whole new audience, because YouTube brought out their album the way their record company couldn't do it or their management could. So YouTube, in that regard, like you mentioned, it brought to light a whole way of having bands be exposed to us that we couldn't in the 80s or 90s, or even to some point the 2000s. So it's good to see bands getting that second chance to say, hey, now we have some recognition this time. Yeah, we may be a little older, but it's nice to see the younger guys. I like seeing the youth using YouTube to their advantage to check this stuff out. It's one of the best rabbit holes ever, and it excites me because I get to tell people about who generally you want to know, hey, what's good or what do you listen to? And I'm a hoarder when it comes to heavy music. Like, I'm such a filthy hoarder. I could recommend things for weeks. It's a good thing there's no like drinking game that involves me in my recommendations, because we would probably die.
Yeah. It's like drinking to the word patriarchy in the Barbie movie.
I heard how bad they said it constantly. I'm like, oh god.
This is a music podcast, not a pop culture one. So we do have a couple of people in the chat. We got Mr. Paul Hadouken.
Hello, Paul.
And then this is Jeff Carrico. He's actually a guitarist that I went to junior high and high school with, and then lived with for about a year.
Okay.
Phenomenal musician. He also will send me links to stuff that I've never heard before, and I'm like,
Nice. I'm sure I can learn something from him too. That's the beauty
Yeah.
of that. Like for everything I know, there's always someone who knows something else that I don't even know. And that's the beauty of this all. The well is endless. Seriously, it's endless.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, like, Extreme just put out a new album this year.
Yes, he did.
And just seeing the sheer amount of reaction videos to his solo was amazing.
Oh, dude, that's so shredding. like I've always liked them, but I can't say I've always loved them. But no, I liked Extreme. But then when I heard that newest album from him, I'm like, dude, there's some bangers on it. Seriously, it's shred.
Well, and that's the problem with the legacy media. What happened to them really? Because they had those 2 hits on Pornography that weren't near as heavy as the rest of the album. There's some really good, phenomenal playing on that album, but those were the 2 songs that everyone knew because those are the only ones that got airplay.
And that brings it back to the point I said earlier about bands who got really used, exploited, got gypped in the 80s or 90s. And band like Extreme, they're not a new band. They're not.
No.
If people look into it. So yeah, I'm glad you brought them up. That's a great example of a band who's now riding a second wave. And it's cool because they're actually putting up stuff right now that's as good as what they put out then. So I'm happy for them that you could argue that they still got it. And that's good because with this YouTube way of going out and finding music, and they don't need to, obviously they're still on a label like an indie based label, but they don't need it in the sense of reaching out to people because the powers of YouTube and the word of mouth is so much better than relying solely on a record label to get your music out.
Right. Well, and I didn't even know they were putting out a new album until Rick Beato did a video on it.
Oh, really? Huh?
So I found out they were doing a new record, and I'm like, holy crap.
That's cool that you know them. Not many people I know can say that. So you actually get some points right there.
I was an Extreme fan back in the day.
No way.
Because they really hit big right when I started junior high.
Okay.
That was kind of, so I heard the 2 songs, but I actually, my parents bought me the cassette of the album. So I listened to the whole thing.
What?
And the way I grew up was we always listened to the whole albums. Even though, he would make.
I'm an album guy. I'm an album guy. I'm not a singles guy. I'm an album guy.
Yeah. So that's how I always like to listen to stuff. And that's also my biggest problem with apps these days is, like if you have a collection of MP3s or something on your phone or a tablet or something like that, almost none of the apps will run it in discography order.
Oh yeah.
Again, I'm starting from the beginning of the discography and I'm working my way through.
Yep. That's still the pierce to me too. What I do is because even though I still buy my albums, even though I still buy, I'll still use Spotify for when I'm in the car sometimes.
Right.
If there's something that's in somewhere deep in my shelves, I just can't find it. So I'll use Spotify for that. But I'll set up the playlist. And obviously it takes extra labor to do this, but I always customize all my playlists so it plays the songs in album order. And that can, obviously that's because I'm an album guy, that OCD has carried over, that I'm like, I refuse to break out of that. If I have to take these extra steps to make sure it stays in album order, I will. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because if there's one thing, and this is something that metal in particular has been hurt by, is singles. And it's not that, putting out a song it is made a lot of one-hit wonders on bands that actually aren't one-hit wonders. And it's also kind of misconceptualized a lot of bands. I think a great example, even though they're not fully metal, but they have some aspects if you look past their singles. Soundgarden, they had a great album called Bad Motorfinger, but they are very misconceptualized from songs like Black Hole Sun. Because when people hear the name Soundgarden, they think like a more ballady song like that. But if you actually listen to the rest of the album, it's got some rock and riffs. And I remember I guess you could say I was not really a fan of the band. I didn't really hate them, but I used to kind of write them off because I couldn't stand Black Hole Sun. I didn't think it was a bad song, but I think hearing it around high school and everywhere,
it was just too
fatigued the hell out of me. And then all of a sudden, around my early 20s, I actually heard the entire album on accident. And I'm like, this is actually a good album. Why did I ignore this? But because of that, it was that day forth when I decided to give AC/DC actually a second chance, because all I had heard was the same 5 songs on the radio. But if you actually listen to their entire albums, I'd argue bands like that, their best songs are not their hits.
Yeah.
They're seriously like way better. Like it's all about the deep cuts. Those are the type of bands I define them by their deep cuts. I'd say that for them. I'd even argue that for the Judas Priests of the world, the Anthraxes of the world, the Testaments of the world.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of those bands, I feel like I enjoy a lot of their lesser known songs that aren't the singles, because those singles can easily, also especially it's worse when a label puts out the ballad of a band, because I'm not saying it makes it bad, which there are some that are, but even for the ones that are good, a lot of people think that's like the one song. And I remember when there was the big Guitar Hero revolution, which I loved, by the way. I thought it was a great game. But I remember a band that blew up because of that was Dragon Force. And I remember when Dragon Force blew up, they said this. I read this in an interview. They said that they would play their song that was on Guitar Hero, Through the Fire and Flames, and they said the crowd would bolt out after they play it. So they said, decide we're going to move that song to the last song of our set, because they used to open with it. And they said they would have a portion of the crowd, which is like a weird thing. It's like you spend all this money and time to get there. Why not stick around for the set? So they decided to move it to the end, so that way people stuck around for the show. And they say it mostly worked. It mostly worked. It's sad that it has to do it, and that's something that singles has definitely hurt, is the attention span, where people hear a song and that's it. It's like, yeah, I'm not saying it makes it a good or bad song, but it's hurt the attention span of checking out other songs, is what I'm getting at.
Well, and Paul's right. I was on Devil Made Me Do It's channel this last Sunday.
Good guy.
And we were doing a ranking of 70s bands. Now, the criteria was they had to have actually started in the 70s. They may not have had their career apex in the 70s, but they had to at least start. And AC/DC was definitely S tier, because they had the catalog, the longevity, just the sheer cultural impact, and the fact that they survived losing their lead singer, who was beloved, and then they were able to take it even farther into the stratosphere. Because most bands don't come back from losing a lead singer that's beloved.
It depends. I mean, in hard rock, it seems to be that way. It's definitely in the hard rock genre. It definitely seems a bit harder. I do think metalheads, as far as metal goes, fans are a little bit more accepting of it. But yeah, in hard rock, it seems to be like, if you lose it, forget about it. Forget about it. So it's like game over for them. It's really unfortunate.
I'm not sure who Curtain Wall is. Maybe something you may know more about there, Mr. Nick.
I'm not sure as well. Honestly, I'm not sure. So
that's something to write.
Like I said, I'll admit if I don't know something. I'm not one of those guys who's gonna fake knowing something. I may know a lot, but I don't know everything.
Curtain Wall. That's a note taker right there. Awesome. Well, yeah, and while I've got you here, I kind of just want a little bit more of your babackground, kind of how you came up in the scene. Is it like, a love from an early age? Did you come into it later in life? Because it's amazing. It's always fascinating to me how different people come into genres.
Yeah, no, I've noticed everyone's got usually a very unique background. Some are a bit more similar than ours. For me, it was interesting. So when I first got into metal, I guess you could say it was a little bit more of the mainstream type of stuff that was hard rock leaning on metal. And there were more of some more accessible stuff. Of course, I heard stuff like Metallica, Master Puppets type of stuff, Pantera, Vulgar Display of Power. It was a very typical stuff. And then, of course, I had heard even bands, metalized rock bands like System of a Down. And then, I enjoyed a lot of those albums. And then I just got curious. I decided to look beyond what I saw was in front of me. So I bought Slayer Rain and Blood at a Best Buy. I remember I bought Rain and Blood. I remember that cover really stuck out for me. That was from Larry Carroll. And I remember thinking, okay, this cover looks super brutal, and something tells me this album would be kick-ass. There's 10 songs at 28 minutes. I'm like, I'm curious. So we put on my friend's car, and I was just so blown away. It was like faster than lightning to me. It was. I was at that time. It was the fastest thing I've ever heard. Which obviously since then I've heard way faster things. But at the time, my mind was so blown. I was shooken. before shook was like a term. I was just like, me and my buddy, we were living out in the middle of nowhere, like in our parents' house because we were teenagers, but we were driving around in no man's land, just listening to Rain and Blood in its entirety, and we were just so blown away. We're like, dude, I think that whole entire album, I think, slowed down in one song for about 30 seconds, and that's it. The entire 20 minutes. It's a constant deck punch in the nose. Like, you are a bloody mess, no pun intended, after it. And then, of course, I was obsessed. I looked into their other albums, like Seasons in the Abyss, Hell Awaits, Show No Mercy, and I was hooked. I was obsessed. It led me to buying their shirts, the DVD, had to go see them live, all that whole spiel. And it was great because I saw what a cultural phenomenon Slayer was. It blew my mind because, like, when you're at a Slayer show, it's not like any other metal show. Slayer fans don't say Slayer. They scream it, and they scream it all day. You can't even be at a metal or hard rock show, and there's usually that one guy who's at the show who screams Slayer the same way some guy requests for Freebird at a show. Screaming Slayer is tradition at a show. It's just tradition, which is a great tradition.
Oh, yeah.
But, I was obsessed with Slayer, and I saw there was other bands. I saw there was Megadeth. I got obsessed with Megadeth, especially like for me, that was a really cool thing to become obsessed with Megadeth because of the history and beef Dave Mustaine had with the Metallica guys.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So to me, it's like I knew in my head, okay, I'm the Megadeth guy at school. I'm the Megadeth guy. So while everyone else is a Metallica guy, I was just like, nah, bro, peace sells over here. This is my shit. And it led me to Anthrax. And then, of course, I started looking into the lesser known thrash bands like Testament, Exodus, Death Angel, Forbidden, Suicidal Tendencies, Sacred Reich. And then you had like the Brazilian wave, which included Sepultura. You had the Canadian wave, which had Razor, Annihilator, Exciter. Then you had the German wave, which was the Teutonic Four, Creator, Tanker, Destruction, and Sodom. Switzerland, you had Coroner. It was just like, and over in Jersey, you had Overkill. It was just like, holy crap. This is like a geography lesson. I was learning about music and geography at the same time. And it was cool because all those bands, not only could they riff and shred like crazy, but a lot of them also had hooks. They had memorable vocal chorusy parts. They all had hooks. They all had singers that all had their own voice, that's not easy for a whole genre where you can tell every band apart instantly. And that blew my mind about that. And of course, I moved on to like the death metal stuff, the black metal stuff as well. But yeah, as far as heavy metal goes, I want to try to keep it to one subgenre tonight. I took
metal,
Yeah, well, no, well, that way we don't go too much on Rebel. When I took a turnaround to go back into the further roots before thrash metal, because thrash metal kind of came after heavy metal. I started getting to traditional heavy metal. My first major band I got into was Judas Priest. Rob Halford had just rejoined the band. I'm like, oh, okay. Apparently, this is a big deal that this Rob Halford guy had rejoined Judas Priest. I looked in them and I saw they had done a bunch of albums with them. And of course, Halford's voice blew my mind. I couldn't believe it. I was just like, holy crap. When I heard albums like Painkiller, Defenders of the Faith, Sad Wings of Destiny, Screaming for Vengeance. And I love how all their album covers were killer too. Their covers are killer. I was like, man, you could own a painting of those. So it felt like almost like having comic book imagery. It is. It is.
Because that's really what the best thing about like the greatest album art. You had no idea what the album was, but you see the art, you're very intrigued, and then you buy it. Now it's just so it's almost like AI generated, stuff. It just kind of seems processed.
The digital art does hurt it. The digital art does hurt it a lot. Like, doesn't make the music by itself, but it's nice when you're like, especially if you own like a vinyl and you have that big art form. Luckily, there's still a few guys who still go at it with pencils. Obviously, they're fewer and far between. But yeah, I love it. If I own something on vinyl, I could tell it was penciled or painted by someone. There's something about that extra special. You could see all the little tiny details from the pencil or the brush. So much heart went into that. Long hours go into those things. And I respect that. That's why I try to own some of those on vinyl, because even though I grew up on CDs, I have thousands of them. I try to get certain albums on vinyl, especially if they have good art, because I want to look at all the little details, and especially when you see all the liner notes too. The liner notes were my best friend. So before there was YouTube, I would look at the liner notes for discovering bands, because you look at the thanks list. The thanks list would have Judas Priest thanks, all these bands. You would like Accept, Manowar, Warlock, and you're like, okay, who are all these bands? And I gotta see what's going on here. So who's Saxon? What's going on here? Who's Striper? What's going on here? You realize, holy crap, there's a whole other wave of bands. Exciter, Canada, there's this whole other wave of bands that I'm totally missing out. And I would look into stories. A lot of them had stories that kind of harken back to when we were starting off in the stream. Some of them were bands that were loved in their home countries, but if they came to America for a record deal, they would get really shafted, whether it's the company or their management. And that's unfortunate, but it seems like a lot of those bands are having revivals nowadays of sorts, which is also like Saxon, for example. They're on like 22 or 23 albums. Their last 3 or 4 albums are just as good as their earliest output. And they're a huge band in their home country of the UK. Anthem from Japan, they are great as well. Their new album's kick ass. It's called Crimson and Jet Black. And in their home country, Japan, dude, they're Judas Priest in Japan.
Nice.
But when they come to America, they're lucky if they can play to 100 people.
Right.
It's so interesting, that contrast. But dude, yeah, Anthem, that's probably my favorite album that's come out this year is from Anthem. I highly recommend it. Razor Fist did a great metal mythos on them. If you've watched any of those, if you haven't, you should.
I need to watch that.
Watch his metal mythos on Anthem.
In general, just because he's absolutely hilarious.
Oh yeah. Oh god. Yeah. Oh dude, his Motorhead one's really good. And that's another. When I heard Motorhead, man, dude, forget it. Like, not only do obviously the look that impersonates Lemmy, but when I heard all those albums, I was, dude, hooked. Inferno blew my mind. Obviously, Overkill, the album Overkill from Motorhead, Down Another Day, Sacrifice. I was just like, to me, Lemmy's voice was just perfect, because it had a little bit of a punkier edge at times, but yet still through that whiskey gargling sound, you could still decipher all the words he was saying, even though his voice was on drugs and alcohol for 40 years straight.
Well, and my bass player, Tulsa here, has a good question. What do you think was the first metal band?
Black Sabbath. Because Tony Iommi had that accident that led to the first riff of metal being invented, because he had cut his finger. I can't remember. He was working at some some factory job, and he had cut his finger. And because of that accident, he had messed up something. I can't remember the specifics of it, but he had messed up something with one of the guitar sounds. And that accident turned into a whole sound. And that's what led to a lot of stuff you hear on like Paranoid and Masters of Reality, those very early Black Sabbath albums. So yeah, Black Sabbath is definitely the first band. Now, I could, if you want to get more technical with it, there's bands who were very hard rock, but were a little heavier hard rock. I guess you could say who kind of teetered on it. You could maybe argue bands like UFO, and to some extent, Rush had some stuff. But as far as the first full-on traditional heavy metal band, Black Sabbath. Yeah, I'd even make an argument that Deep Purple definitely leaned on some heavy stuff sometimes too.
Oh, and that riff for Highway Star.
Oh, dude, it jams. It jams. No, it does. It jams. Like I said, those bands to me are still hard rock, but they definitely teeter on heavy parts at times. And if you look at a lot of the traditional, like straight heavy metal bands, a lot of them are influenced by Deep Purple, UFO, Rush. So you could see, like I said, the prototype, the skeleton of it being formed.
Yeah.
Cover
album,
right?
Album art. I actually even bought like a couple different art books of Roger Dean.
Oh, nice!
He's done so many. I mean, obviously he's known for that's his bread and butter.
Yeah.
But I mean, he did so many other artists. He did a deep Uriah Heep album. He did of course all of Asia's output.
Uriah Heep is good. They actually did a tour with Priest a few years ago.
So he and he even got into video game logo design, which I thought was kind of odd. Psygnosis's original logo was his. Tetris for decades was a Roger Dean logo.
What?
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. Hell yeah.
Ghost has the best album art of recent bands. I haven't heard Ghost.
So I'm gonna be that guy.
Be that guy.
I'm gonna be that guy. I like the first 3 albums from Ghost. I don't really like the last 2. The first 3 had like a Blue Oyster Cult meets Merciful Fate type of thing going on, which are very 2 polarizingly different hard rock sounds. One is hard rock that teeters on metal, and the other is full on heavy metal. They had like very macabre like imagery type of lyrics, very dark stuff. But then they start going more 80s like hard rock, synthy hard rock. It's not bad at all. I don't even think it's bad. I just feel like it pales in comparison to the first albums where they're more on the 70s like sound, where it was more the straight traditional Merciful Fate influenced metal.
Mm-hmm.
I did like the artwork to that first album. It was called Opus Eponymous. It's a good album.
I was pulling that up on Discogs, and yeah, that's pretty dope. I mean,
that's based off of the what's that movie, Salem's Lot. If you look at the movie poster for Salem's Lot, contrast Salem's Lot to Opus Eponymous. Yeah, that's Opus. Now look at Salem's Lot.
I could definitely see that.
And then they had their follow-up album, which was called Infestissimum. That's based off the cover for the movie Amadeus. Remember Amadeus?
Mm-hmm. I had to watch that in high school because I took. Of course, it's not going to pull up. Is Discogs having issues?
I love Discogs, and I hate it. I love and hate Discogs. It's a love-hate because I hate it because I want something and I can't afford it.
Yep. And I am on Bandcamp, actually. I do have 2 albums on there. I've got my first electronic one called Electronic Music, and I do have my GoldenEye album that I did last year.
I'll have to listen to that.
I did I found the old sound fonts from the actual game from 64, and I wanted to see if I could write an entire album based off those sound effects and those sound fonts, and basically like write a sequel to GoldenEye. So even each song has its own mission and has objectives and everything listed for it, and there's a story to it. And but yeah, that was a lot of fun. I think my Bandcamp link should be in the description.
All right, I have it open, so I'm gonna definitely say that to check out, because that is very curious, because I love me some GoldenEye, and I love that era Bond as well. So that I'm looking forward to checking that out, dude. Hell yeah.
Well, what's funny, the best performing video on my channel entirely is I did all the actual Bond themes in the pause music. So the bass, the drums and the gongs, the radar sounds are constant throughout, but it's every 2 minutes it's the Bond theme for every movie, but done in that style. That one is the one that has performed the best on my channel. I think I've got almost 9,000 views on that one.
Well, it's evergreen content. It's one of those things. So it makes sense that was definitely the one. It's some people could just go on and replay and replay and replay. Makes sense.
Yep. And it all started because I was trying to do the On Her Majesty's Secret Service theme. Because that was the one movie that didn't have a vocal intro of the main Bond themes of the Bond films. So, but yeah, that was a lot of fun to make. So yes, I am on Bandcamp. I'm on Bandcamp.
Check it out. I'm gonna check it out. I
have a merch store for no real reason other than to have one, because you got to have one.
I will eventually. I'm starting up memberships next month, so that's gonna be the closest thing to it. That's gonna be the closest thing to it. But yes,
I'm just a few subs off from getting those. So,
dude, you'll get there, man. You'll get there. And it's gonna be glorious. It's gonna be glorious. But back to albums. Yeah, it was a big thing to get going through these like waves of like bands, especially when I was getting to the traditional metal stuff. was cool because not only was I just getting into Priest, Saxon, and I actually, my Black Sabbath, I had to specify those words, my Black Sabbath. I am a Dio Sabbath fan. I'm probably, dare I say, like I worship at the throne of Dio. I like the Ozzy stuff. I do like it. I do. But for me, that was my Black Sabbath, and it could have something to do with those were the first albums I heard full. Because of course, yes, I heard Iron Man and War Pigs.
Right.
But when I listened to the Mob Rules album, when I first heard Mob Rules and Heaven and Hell, I was like, Dio's voice blew me away, and Tony Iommi's riffage. I was just like, this, to me, everything about those albums, just everything fell into place. It was heavy, and it was a little bit faster than the Ozzy stuff, because Ozzy stuff kind of teetered on like almost what influenced the doom genre of metal. If you're aware of the doom genre, that's definitely more the doomy side, like the Electric Wizards of the world. Whereas the Dio era stuff, that was starting to like get a little faster, and that's what influenced the Saxons and the Warlocks of the world. And that was like perfectly, well, pun intended, my speed. But man, when I first heard Mob Rules and I heard that the song The Mob Rules, dude, like I was like, bro, like
Black Sabbath is a lot of ways split the same way Van Halen is.
Oh yes,
because you have your Van Halen fans, and then you have the Van Hagar fans.
Oh yeah, no, and there's good arguments there. Sammy Hagar actually had a good band before Van Halen. People don't talk about, called Montrose. And it sounds like you're at least at the very minimum where Montrose is good. Yeah. So if anyone is out there and like, well, I don't like Van Hagar, okay, that's fine. Give his stuff with Montrose a shot. You might like that more, because there are some times where I won't like a certain singer with a certain band, but I'll hear them in another band. I'm like, dude, this is jamming. It's very interesting how that happens. It's happened.
You know, and I liked the Van Hagar era,
I do too,
mainly because it tended to be a bit more mature in its rock. I mean, of course, the first album still called For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. We know what that stands for. You know, it's an obvious joke, but you know, I think they were a little bit more serious and a little bit more tight in that era. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the Roth era. I mean, that's just pure unadulterated fun. But I can, like I said, I see the arguments for both, and I'm the same with Black Sabbath. I love both eras. You know, I'm more on the Ozzy side because that's really what I grew up listening to. Because my dad had the Paranoid album, so that's what I listened to, was that one. So then I didn't get into the Dio until after I heard Dio as a single artist.
Did you hear Born Again from Black Sabbath? The one album that they did with Ian Gillan?
I have not heard that one. That's one I need to check out.
Listen to it. Check it out. It's called Born Again. The artwork is kind of terrible. It's like sucky, but the music on it's really good. It's the only album they did with Ian Gillan. This is after Dio departed the first time, I think. And because he did come back for Dehumanizer, their third album under the Black Sabbath name. And then, Ian Gillan did his one album, and then Tony Martin did 5 albums, actually. With Black Sabbath, he did 5 albums. Actually, he's the singer who's done the second most amount of albums with Black Sabbath. Not even Dio has done that. Dio's at 4. Tony Martin's at 5. Ian Gillan did 1. Glenn Hughes did 1. Yeah. And then, of course, there's Ozzy at the most of my albums. But, dude, yeah, I remember when I saw videos of that Priest is filling in for Black Sabbath, I thought, oh, hell yeah, that's going to be great. And I listened, I'm like, oh, maybe that's not so great. And it once again shows you can take the best singer and one of the best bands, and just because they're both the best at their own things doesn't mean that they worked well together. Yeah. Certain things are meant to go together, and certain things are not.
It's like with Paul Rodgers and Queen. Like, I love Paul Rodgers as a vocalist. Fantastically, thoroughly underrated vocalist.
Yes.
Just does not fit Queen.
No, he does not. And that's unfortunate, because he's going to be misjudged horribly because of the Queen stuff. But he's good. He's really good.
All the stuff I think he's fantastic. And, you know, I said he's got a fantastic voice, but he just doesn't fit Freddie Mercury, because no one will ever.
Nope. No, it does not. No, it does not.
So
Yeah.
Tulsi did have a question about tech. Do you play?
I do not play proper instruments. I have been in bands and I have been a vocalist. I was the frontman, lyricist, handled the business stuff. I was in a few different bands up until my early 20s. Yeah, early 20s. So it was fun. I played on stage a few times, played a few times with touring bands, and played a few festivals. I think the biggest show I played to was like 400 or 500 people. That was cool. It was awesome. It was really awesome. I have done shows where I played to 100 a handful of times too. But yeah, usually the average show is like 50 people. Even then, you can make a good thing out of 50 people too. So yeah, it was a good time in my life. But I decided to pursue the writing aspect instead. I did work for a company called Digital Tour Boss, and they are a music website. To specify that, music website. I happen to be the metal guy there, and I did a lot of the reviews for going to live shows, and I had fun with it. It was a blast, and as a moment in my life, those 3 years I did that I would never take back. But the problem was, when their website was growing, you always look at, okay, what's growing in your business, what's not. And the reviews were not. And the reason why the reviews were not growing was because all the other reviewers were not showing up to their shows. I'm the only one holding it up, but one man can't do that. That's just impossible.
Exactly. Yeah.
So he kind of axed it, which I get it. If I was running a company, I'd do the same thing. So I'd never held it against him for doing. I thought that's a smart business move, but I'm like, man, I got to do something of my own one day. And well, I kind of got some little different going with the YouTube channel, but I every now and then I do a year I don't really cover metal as much as I like to on my channel, but I'll still do some specials. Like I did a best of 2022 on my channel, and I did have David Sanchez, the singer from Havoc, to interview on my channel last year. And I've got a few other guys who I'm hoping to talk to, hopefully within the next 6 months or less. And of course, I'll do a best of 2023 because I've got mostly the list. There could be other things that come out that change my mind, but as of now, I have a list. If I need to do the list tomorrow, I have it set. But we gotta see how the next 4 months sets up. But yeah, I do love talk about it, and still, once again, there's so much good stuff out there. Like especially from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Like I tell people, like if you haven't, look up Warlock, Triumph, and Agony. That album is fantastic, and it has Doro Pesh. She is one of the first metal queens.
Mm-hmm.
This is not Girl Boss. This is the lady who did this stuff when it was not in style.
Right.
And she's still at it. She's actually playing in Houston, Texas next year to a festival that I'm going to. And she's doing a set based off the band she was in, Warlock. I'm excited for that because that's like, I love Warlock. So I'm good at that. And for those who like stuff that is more on the medieval side, I would say look into Saxon. Saxon had an album out last year called Carpe Diem, and dude, it makes you want to go into battle riding a horse and fighting off some other dudes with swords. Saxon will do that.
Going
Frank
Frazetta style.
Oh, dude, yeah. Well, a lot of artwork from Manowar albums look like it could have come from Frank Frazetta. The album of Kings of Metal. Look at that Kings of Metal cover. It looks just like a Frank Frazetta piece. I don't know if it actually is him or someone who's just really influenced by him.
Right.
But yeah, that Manowar, that dude, some of those Manowar covers, woo, love those covers. Except Balswar, I always say, except is the AC/DC of Germany. I straight up listen to Balls to the Wall if you haven't. And then for everyone in the chat, remember the song. Accept Balls to the Wall. Save the song. And then you'll find me, whether it's on Twitter, YouTube, and you're right, either in the comments of one of my videos or on the live stream. Nick, holy crap, you were right. This is AC/DC Gone Germany. John Mass, to answer your question, traditional heavy metal. Now, I do got a good glam metal recommendation, and it's going to be something no one here is expecting. And I mean no one. No one. You ready?
Let me hear it.
Ever heard of a band called Pantera?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Not the Pantera that you know.
Oh.
Before they blew up in 1990 with Cowboys from Hell, in the 80s, they were a full-on glam metal band. Dimebag, Vinny, Rex. All three of those guys from the 90s area that you know were in this glam band called Pantera.
Well, thanks for stopping by, Field. I'm glad you joined us.
Field. They had a singer named Terry Glaze who did a few albums, and then Phil Anselmo joined, who became the singer from there through the duration of their career. And Phil's voice also sounds drastically different too. I would highly recommend looking up their album called Power Metal. Pantera had an album called Power Metal, and unfortunately, they're never going to be re-released until they become public domain, which is going to be another 50 or 60 years, because what happened was Diamond Vinny were the only ones who owned the rights to those glam albums. And yes, that's right. Scrambles knows Dimebag was known as Diamond Daryl at the time. He was during the glam era. And during that era, they didn't have their albums put out through major distributors. They owned it all themselves. And I actually talked to Phil Anselmo once when he was playing with his Doom band Down. And I remember one of the guys, I didn't ask the question, one of the guys who was there was like, hey, man, did you ever consider playing some of the songs from the glam era when Pantera became big in the 90s? And he was just like, man, I love those albums. And this is before Vinnie Paul died, too. He was like, Vince hated those albums. I was just like, oh. So that's what happened there. But yes, Power Metal Pantera, if you not look pure seriously, it's so good. And Phil's vocals, I'd say the closest Pantera album to what they became is probably Cowboys from Hell, because he does a lot more Rob Halford, Bruce Dickinson type of stuff on this album that is full on high falsetto vocals. Oh, it's so good. I call him Glam Terra. But dude, it's great. It's so good, and it shreds too. Oh, it shreds.
And I got kind of reintroduced to and I think they would be more considered in the hair metal, glam metal genre. But it was through, oddly enough, Billy Corgan when he took
Billy Corgan knows good music.
Well, when he took over the National Wrestling Alliance, the NWA, and brought back that wrestling promotion like it was done back in the 70s, his intro for the show, for the Power Show, was Into the Fire by Dawkins. Yeah, I hadn't heard Dawkins in a couple of decades, and it just got me back into. I need to listen to them again. And I forgot they were kind of just the hidden gem of that era. You know, because they could shred with the best of them, but they were just overpowered by, Poison and Motley Crue and all those groups. They kind of just fell through the cracks.
Oh, did they fall through the cracks? All right. That's another great example of a band who was just as quality as the other bands. They just didn't happen to have the same recognition as the rest. Great example. Dawkins, dude. Dawkins had some riffs, man. They had some hooks.
Oddly enough, one of my favorite songs that they did was they did a metal version of Santa Claus is Coming to Town. It's just fucking amazing. Oh, it's such a great cover. It makes no sense why they did it, but they did it. And then another band that's released an album this year that I wasn't expecting to hear from again was Winger.
Winger put out a new one this year. Actually, it's good.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, unfortunately, they got pegged with the same hair metal brush, just because they focused on Kip Winger and his hair.
Yep.
And of course, that first
horribly misjudged
about having relations with an underage girl. But their third album, Pull, I think was actually one of their better ones. I think it was better than their debut. But that came out in like 1991, 92, if I remember right. But their third album, Pull, I think is actually their best one.
See, you know your stuff. Yeah, the fact that you dug for those albums and you know them, and once again, it helps that you're a guy who knows albums, not just singles.
Right. Well, I managed to get a copy of Winger 4, and the only reason I got it is because they were giving it away free when I was working at Guitar Center.
That's a good. Hey, dude, take the win, man.
Oh yeah. Although I will say about my days in Guitar Center, it was funny because you always the Wayne's World joke. Don't play Stairway.
Mm-hmm.
We never had that.
Oh,
Our issue was people very horribly, somewhat slightly attempting to play Sweet Child of Mine. God, I almost hate that song now because of that. Because I had to hear.
So this is one of the few times where Spotify comes in handy. I have that, of course, I have the album Appetite for Destruction on CD, but on Spotify, I took out the hits and I listened to the rest of the album, and it's fantastic. I think Appetite, despite the overplayedness of the singles, Appetite for Destruction is so good. It's so good. Oh man, is it good? Axl is an asshole, but he killed on that album.
Yeah. Although he looks like Mama Fratelli from the Goonies now.
Oh, dude, he had that weird white Snoop Dogg phase for a while. Now he looks exactly like you said. He looks like Mama Fratelli from the Goonies now. It's dude, he is. He's definitely have had some interesting phases in the last few years with his appearance.
So, and of course,
ridiculous.
I listened to a lot of the hair metal, of course, because a lot of it got just a shit ton of airplay on MTV back when MTV played actual music.
Yeah.
So I heard a lot of Poison and Motley Crue, and they're all right. I mean, I actually preferred the first two Motley Crue albums to anything that came out during their heyday. But it's one of those things that you just can't get around. But I like a lot of the stuff that's kind of been similar to that. But Jeff was asking about Steel Panther. Oh my God, they're fucking amazing.
I like what I've heard, and it's sad. This is going to be a very normie take. Sad part is I've not listened to full album, but I actually don't mind the hits that I've heard. I genuinely mean that. I actually don't mind their hits, so I can imagine, man, if I think their hits are pretty good, I'm sure I'm gonna love the album. So,
I understand
an album to recommend. Please throw it out, send it my way. I'll check it out by tomorrow.
Because I understand what they were trying to do. They were basically doing a parody of hair metal.
Yes.
While still managing to write great music, so they're the best kind of parody. Like Spinal Tap is a great parody. They still wrote great freaking music.
Yes.
Big Bottoms, I listen to that song on repeat if I have to, because I just love it so much, because it's still a great song. And he's obviously making, very unveiled references to what he wants to do to the big lady with the bottom. I understand what they're doing. Of course, my favorite Spinal Tap moment though was when they were on Letterman, and they all came out playing bass guitar.
Dude, yes,
I remember seeing clips of that. On lead bass guitar, Nigel on bass guitar.
Dude, so if you ever look at IMDb, check this out. Look up the score for Spinal Tap on IMDb, the movie. And if you know how when people look at ratings for stuff like on Rotten Tomatoes, IMDb, look at the score for Spinal Tap. They rate it out of 11. Because you get it. Yeah. Yeah.
That whole scene is just genius. Like when someone Les Paul is like, listen, that sustain. Well, nothing's playing. Well, if it's playing, you would. It'd be like, wah! You go out and make a sandwich. You can come back and still, wah!
It's so funny. Like, it's accurate because it gives you the gist of what it's like to be in a band. And even though I was just in local bands, I'm like, man, there's some hardcore relatable content. It's so relatable. It really is. I don't know how a movie like that translated, but it does. Even several decades later, it really hits home. It really does. I can imagine what it's like for the bigger national touring bands. How much more it hits home for them, of course. I was just a rinky dinky, local bands, but I can imagine for the touring bands. But seriously, have you seen the extended cut of Spinal Tap?
Yes.
So good.
Well, and the commentary. They do the commentary in character. Like the
Yes, I
original DVD I bought.
love that they did that.
The original
Yes.
DVD I bought, it's like you see the black skin, like, ooh, black. It's more of a pastel black. And then the logo comes in huge and then just stops like really tiny. It's too small. I got to mush my face up to get it to look at it. Steel Panther, the other one that was kind of in that started in that vein, but went differently from that was Fozzy. I don't know if you ever heard of them.
Oh, I know him. Chris Jericho's band. Yeah.
Their first album, the premise of it was that they were stuck in Japan under a horrible record contract. So they wrote all the hits that everyone else actually got famous for, but they were the ones that wrote them. So that was the joke. But then it actually turned out to be their actually a pretty darn good band.
I'm glad you noticed that, because a lot of my friends, when we first heard about Fozzy many moons back, a lot of people, my friends, thought Jericho was being serious. I'm like, guys, he's joking. I'm like, he's freaking with you guys, and they all were mad. They thought Jericho was serious. Like, guys, he's joking. It's part of his character. They were so mad. He said those comments. Like, guys, it's part of the character.
It's the joke.
Laughed at and then my friends eventually all figured it out. Like 7-8 years later, they all felt so stupid. Like, oh. That's when you know Jericho is good at being a good character on screen. He can convince people that what he's saying was the truth.
Well, really, Fozzy is Chris Jericho with Stuck Mojo.
Oh yeah,
it's the band Stuck Mojo, but without their singer. Because they're in the rap metal genre, which they've got some really good music. Because they did the first time I heard about them was actually in WCW. In 98, because they did a music video during the feud between Diamond Dallas Page and Raven. So their music video was them fighting, and then they actually played during one of the Nitros, and so that's how I'd heard about them. And then when I heard what Fozzy was, like, oh, he's got Stuck Mojo's band, but with Chris Jericho leading it.
Yeah, no, I remember when I first heard Fozzy, and I was like, hey, they're not bad. They got some once again, another band that's got some kill riffs. Jericho's a great singer. He's a great frontman from what I've watched of him too. He's a great performer. I would love to see it, but I do have friends who've seen them live, and I actually have friends who have played with him as well. They've been the locals that opened for the Fozzy shows, and they see Jericho's a cool guy. They said like he's not someone who acts like he's better than everyone when he sees local bands. He's very acknowledging and gives advice if they ask for it. He's really cool like that, and I love hearing those type of stories. I've not heard one negative comment from Jericho about people who've met. I've not heard one. I know people who've met him at wrestling shows. I know people who've met him at signings. I know people who've met him attending concerts, not playing the concerts, attending the concerts. I've heard nothing but Jericho, and Jericho knows the stuff too. I remember when I heard Jericho mention this one great band called Sabotage, and I'm thinking, did Chris Jericho just mention Sabotage? Are my worlds colliding right now? Because that was like a weird, it kind of freaked me out, because like Sabotage is like this really obscure like metal band, and then there's Chris Jericho from the mainstream of wrestling. I was just like, what is this timeline? I love this. Like, Jericho knows who Sabotage is. Like, that blew my mind when I first heard Jericho name drop Sabotage. That was like, what? He knows who they are, and he's a fan? Dude, and I realized who Jericho's a real one, because sometimes when you're a guy who becomes big from another, I guess, form of entertainment, you could be some people might think, oh, he's just trying to cash in on the genre. No, Jericho knows his stuff. Even if you don't like Fozzy, you gotta admit that the guy knows his stuff. He's a real one. He's not a poser. No. Jericho is a fan of the music, and he's always been about that genre. Always has.
Oh yeah. And speaking of Motorhead and the wrestling connection, the fact that
Triple H
twice used them
for WrestleMania,
because he used them for the Evolution stable, and then of course his own theme that he still uses to this day.
Yes. Oh, I remember when because back then I didn't know Motorhead were a band, but I remember it was WrestleMania 17 when Triple H faced The Undertaker. And that was when Triple H had Motorhead actually perform the song live.
Mhm.
I remember when they came on stage to perform that song that they set up for them to play, I was like, holy crap, that's an actual band? I thought they just had some guy who came and did the voice.
Right.
That was my Motorhead gateway at the time, was that, because I was like, holy crap, that's awesome. Like, I love that. And that's what led me down to, that was my first Motorhead song. The second was, of course, Ace of Spades, because of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 or 3.
Mhm.
But once my first album from Motorhead was Inferno. Once I heard Inferno, I remember I heard this song called In the Year of the Wolf, and I was obsessed. I think I wore that CD out. I think I wore it out. I had to buy another copy because I wore that one out so bad. So now I had to go seek out a reissue because my original is so scratched up from all the years of listening. So it's a 19-year-old album, and it's worn down. It got all the plays in the world.
I did that with Foreigner's first album, but that was because it was on 8-track, because that was the only thing I had other than marching band music to listen to in my first car when I was in high school. I got my granddad's Oldsmobile. It was a 98 Oldsmobile.
Air ride suspension.
Oh God, 19 and a half feet long steel monstrosity. You know, enough trunk space to fit at least 3 dead hookers and still keep the spare tire in it.
And still throw a party in it at the same time.
Exactly.
Oh yeah,
yes.
Dude.
Got a full party in this sucker. But it had an 8-track player when I first got it, and he had a case of 8-tracks he handed to me. And most of it was like marching band. There was one that was unlabeled. It was like a lot of weird beatnik music. It was actually not bad. It was kind of fun to listen to. And then he had the Foreigner's first album, and I played that until it broke.
Dude, worth it though, right?
Well, and that's another album. You know, one of those things when you're talking about albums between albums and singles. The single from that album feels like the first time. It's kind of a dumb song. I don't really care for it. But there's a bunch of other songs on that are just absolutely killer.
Isn't it funny how that happens? Seriously, it's really interesting how, like, you get deceived and then you go back some odd years later and like, wow, I really misjudged this band. Dude, yeah, it's so funny how that happens. Now, like, I had to make sure that some bands who are considered mainstream, some of them are better than they're perceived to be. They just happen to be known for one song.
Yep.
So it's definitely when I hear those, it's definitely changed my mind on certain mainstream bands. So yeah, it lets me know, don't write it off so easily. Don't write it off so easily, because that one song could be not what represents the album. It's put out there for a reason. It brings in the normies.
Exactly. And on that note, we were actually getting on to an hour here. I know you've got a show here starting about a half an hour. And yes, I really wanted to thank you for coming on. I know
thanks for having me, man.
I'm just a tiny little pokey show in the dark corner of YouTube, but this has been an absolute blast. I could talk music all day long.
Hey, if you ever want to do a follow-up,
we're definitely gonna have to do a part 2 of this one. So for the channel people, Nickweiser, where can they find you?
My channel is titled 32 Flavors of Nickweiser, and in a half hour, I will be hosting my comic shop show. Every Friday night, we talk comic books, not like movies, but the actual source material itself. And tonight, we have Stone Loki joining us, and we'll be talking Star Wars Higher to the Empire. A lot of people for a long time have been asking us to cover the EU from Star Wars. So everyone who's been asking, your wish is granted tonight. Also, there you go, EU right there, baby. So you got, we're doing that on Toxic Tuesday. I will be talking The Equalizer, Denzel Washington. I put out a video earlier today on proof that Rippaverse does believe in constructive criticism, and I provide receipts to back it up. So if you haven't subbed to my channel, please check it out. And yes, go through my back catalog and dig for my best albums of 2022. It's good. Trust me. And it'll give you a prime warm-up for in 5 months when I do 2023. But seriously, CJP, this is so much fun, dude. I really want us to do a follow-up on this.
Oh, we definitely will. And now for next week's show, we are back to our regular Thursday time slot at 7. And I'm going to have Etep Wakuian from the Place to Be Reviews.
Good guy.
And we're going to be talking about John Carpenter, because everyone knows John Carpenter as the director. Not many people remember the fact that he wrote the music for most of his movies. And he wrote some killer music. I mean, obviously Halloween, everyone knows that single, that theme song. But I mean, the entire album for Escape from New York is just, from beginning to end, it's synth just gold. I love it so much. Of course, he also gave us the worst music videos of the 80s for Big Trouble in Little China.
They're bad, but dude, the music's so good.
And then at the week after that, we are going to do our take 2 with Flawedzilla, because it didn't work out last week, but we're definitely still going to talk sampling and get him on. And then I hope to see you guys next week. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming out and watching. Y'all just keep playing.
See you soon.